Nivla pula family sab lo crown ya. Mimi one lo la customona in lo crown. Forest is very important because you may use forest lo leaf, you may use forest lo karam kakai, food like food. Our life is depend on the forest and land. Got one Chinese company, kami make them looking inside. Kami must tell them straight. Se mi velen happy lo work le molikam, only no one for them low blow forestry, only no one for them low blow type environment, only no one listen to anybody.
Vanuatu's strength is weak because we do not have the money to sustain ourselves. So we have to rely on outsiders. The reason we rely on outsiders is the money. If we say no, then that means there will be no money to Vanuatu. This is where they put the rope on our neck.
Logging or investors coming in for resources in the extractive space, I don't think they see how much vulnerable the communities are and what the connection between people and resources here, the connection between people and the trees, the connection between people and the land. For me, my upbringing is like we were never thought about the monetary value of these resources. We were taught about the importance of having them maintained for generations ahead.
This one, Chinese company will come inside to make them blocking the place. Time come inside, he ask them some lo mi fala, lo come inside, but me for one, with them family blow me fala no agree. Before they come inside, lo make them blocking lo area blow me fala, only use one talk lo convince him la nona, only tell them all same say. Once me will start blocking, but me will fix him road. Road blue fly start local tie, come to place every road, probably fix him. And then number two promise blockata, said, probably make him blocking, probably help me blow, build him up schools, primary schools blow me fly. And number three something, only promise, very strongly blow, run him one full water supply system, blow whole community. And then after low few months stop ko tamol start making blocking me life anemo say wrong pa no true from say one only promise him only no make him.
A newer complaint or a newer concern has been around Chinese businesses moving into rural areas. There's certainly been plenty of stories of issues where the Labour Office has had to intervene and resolve a dispute.
When you saw looking more local sapio, we've been cut them out lo end last year. Up until now, only no move them out every local. One little consequences when me village staff is here. Local town, me village no sabe what time bali karemiko, what time bali pem. Me had some Kaufman. Lo Kaufman must look immediately. Lo work with Chinese company staff ko. Staff me came na lo leries me particularly Santo. Before only cause same problem when me village staff is here, lo sa Narvala Island.
So many of our leaders today, they just focus for their self-benefit. Vanuatu is on fire because the decision-making is collapsing. Why? Because of money. So the decision they make is just for their money. If we are not so careful, then tomorrow the whole economy will be in the hands of foreigners, like Chinese, because they're moving so fast.
There are some unfriendly rhetoric to China and the Chinese people, which is unfair. I think, given time, the majority of people, especially those who are misled, they will see China is a friend. China is an opportunity.
The smoke, that's what cooks the food.
Welcome back to your breakfast show with Radio Nuku'alofa 88.6 FM. The stigma around the Chinese is definitely more than the stigma around the New Zealanders, Australians, and the Americans that's here in the Kingdom of Tonga. Should we be worried about all of them? Or is it just China that we should be worried about? That's it on The Breakfast Show. Hope you guys have a beautiful day. This very next song going out to everybody out there. So this is the Chinese embassy residence. They lease a massive piece of land for their government. So it's definitely visual that they're here in the Kingdom of Tonga. You asked me if they own petrol station. They've recently bought this one from a Tongan owner. So now it belongs to the Chinese. I know they started off with retail and they're getting into a lot of other stuff here in the Kingdom of Tonga. Look at that, guys. This is lamb flaps. Tongan families, every Saturdays, they do little barbecue and they set it out to make some money. Most of these little barbecue spots are now owned by Chinese. I know the perception of China, if you speak to a majority, it won't be good. There's a lot of people, whether it's retail business or farmers, anyone that the Chinese has come in to do similar business, have a problem with them.
Oh, the business running the store. It started from my parents since 1964. Busy all the time when my parents ran the store. But when the Chinese came in, everything goes down.
When people like the Chinese people come here to build their stores, it shows development. But with what cost? Why has government opened it up for these investors to come and compete with the locals and potentially kill them?
Chinese gonna hold the country. Maybe Chinese gonna run Tongan. I think right now, 99% of the business store here in Tonga belong to the Chinese. Only 1% belong to us.
I think the business collaboration basically mutual benefits, and maybe there are some competition, but if you look at the bigger pictures, our relationship has been very much positive and constructive and very well received even by the local people out there.
I went to tell the Chinese, please try to get back their Chinese people. Go back to Chinese. Let us stay here in our country and have free country. 1 or 2 years from now, I'm going to die. I mean the business, maybe. I feel right now, no more. It can't develop.
They're not to blame. It's the government to blame. It's the government who opened the door. It's the government who not just welcomed them into our country, but also made it easy for them to be able to trade here in our country.
We believe in competitions, and we also have a preferential treatment for Tongans. There are certain sectors that are reserved for Tongans, but at the same time, yes, business might feel unfair that they are competing against Chinese, but at the same time, Chinese are providing shops at places that are not currently provided by Tongans. There are differences of views, but competition is pretty strong from the Chinese. There are communities that actually depend on Chinese shops. How do we actually balance that off? Yeah.
Pre-riots, government was a monarchy government. The king would pick the ministers and then also pick the prime minister. The democracy movement was to have it that it would be the people's government. There was a strike, there was a government worker strike, there was a lot of strikes. The day it happened, they would have speeches by the leaders of this democracy movement, and it was received by a crowd that was intoxicated. The speeches that they heard, it fired them up, and then They went around and started smashing at the building from the Prime Minister's office and went all the way down to shoreline. They went from one end of the town to the other end of town, smashing the buildings, and then they came back and burned down the city.
Tonga took on a lot of Chinese debt to basically rebuild the CBD in Nuku'alofa and has been not in a position to pay that debt back. The debt is with the China Exim Bank, which generally doesn't forgive debt.
I did ask the Chinese ambassador, what if Tonga tells you that they cannot pay the loan? His answer was, then we'll go into a friendly negotiation with Tonga. I don't believe it will be friendly, but I believe Tonga is going to lose something to China. What that is, I'm not sure.
Okay, malo.
Of course, it's going to be hard. We have to make hard decisions, including having to cut certain areas so that we can service the loan. It's hard, but we're trying to meet our obligation.
Debt is a significant concern in the Pacific. Taking on debt from China is part of that concern, as is taking on debt from the World Bank or the ADB or anybody else.
It would be very much unfair to frame China as the only person to hold their debt. It's an international community and many other people, many other institutions hold their debt.
My biggest fear is one day our ports, our airports, places where revenue comes in, will be owned by China.
The Pacific has never been a priority of the Western world. I think that's how China has come into the Pacific, because they've seen the gaps. The Western world has been sleeping right at the door, and they've just totally ignored us. And that's why China is saying, I'll come and look after the Pacific. And then at the same time, nobody comes and does something for nothing.
Debt trap diplomacy is being evident in Sri Lanka and in some parts of Africa, where they need to step up their loan repayment with China, or China will seize some of their assets. I think Vanuatu should be very careful when dealing with China.
If you're looking at the world from the U.S. perspective, you could see these infrastructure developments as being the potential for China to put a military presence in these areas. And because of the debt deals, some of these countries may not be able to avoid the pressure that China may decide to bring to allow the positioning of some of their military assets in their countries.
Speculation about China were going to build the so-called military bases in the region. This is absolutely nonsense and disinformation.
Santo was in need of a new wharf. There were concerns in 2018 that China was trying to persuade Vanuatu to let them open a military base. People have said to me, oh, well, that wharf could be dual purpose. There have been loads of military ships tied up there. We've had the French, we've had the Australians, we've had the US. Do you know who hasn't tied up at that wharf? Is China. Yet.
Me one captain. Me work lo Solwata since we finished school. Me korab lo plesa me since me small me start swim lo small part lo area now. Even me harvest them fish, me fishing, spear dive. Suppose I think suppose lo one putula fuse suppose ali pinstawan de putuan pigulao so ali putum town lo one industrial zone.
Magam se is kat full of fish, but after we building wolf, full of reef only dead. So life blow small fish too in mokat. So it had blow like as a fish.
Vanuatu, like a lot of Pacific Island countries, has a significant need for infrastructure, including critical infrastructure like wharves and airfields so that people and stuff can move around.
Before wharf play me, one small wharf no more, but this time after the help the Chinese government can construct them wharf here, make me pick one. I think wharf here me one longest wharf lo Pacific, supposed to be correct.
So they want to extend the wharf so that we can export more copra. The government also want to attract tourists to come to Santo. So the only way of doing that is we have to expand the wharf.
Whenever we provide assistance to the Pacific Island countries, we do not force our will upon the Pacific Island countries. We always consult them what they need. This is the reason why more and more Pacific Island countries are tending to work with China for their national modernization and for their social and economic development.
Especially one place from realize I spell. Karamol kids only come to only swim, enjoy the day. Pay no mokat.
It's difficult for Vanuatu to repay its loan. Where is the money coming from? It's supposed to be coming from our local economy, but it's weak.
I'm very concerned about paying back because hearing from other places in the world that if you cannot pay back the loan to China, then maybe China might say, oh, we might have one of these islands as a repayment.
So me happen say come say one day by Chinese me take over them by me want people impact lo environment mo community belum nila.
It goes back to the principle, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Whether it's Australia, New Zealand, US, China, it's the same principle. When you go around Samoa right now, you see a lot of the businesses are all Chinese owned. So for me, the main concern I have is what will be left for our future generations.
I think it's really important that we acknowledge that the Chinese are part of our recent history. They have been a part of Samoa's economic development. I think it's really important that we bring everybody together and so that we are not just talking about issues and challenges, but we're talking also about solutions moving forward. This is my Uncle Tautai Le Sam's residence, and also happens to be the place where my grandparents are buried. So behind me, this is Sing Chao Le Sam. He is from the south of China. He came here as one of the indentured laborers, and he met my grandmother, and they got married and had 15 children. He was an only child. Maybe that was the motivation to have all these children. And there was also no TV at the time, so that was entertainment.
When people hear about the Chinese in Samoa, the first thing that kind of gets brought out is the idea of, the rising China, which is kind of the discourse that's all around the world. The relationship between Chinese and Samoan people goes back more than 100 years.
This is the cemetery for all the Chinese dating back to the early 1900s. We're trying to raise some funds so that we can do some renovations. As part of our service, of appreciation to those who came before us.
There are Samoan Chinese families. We think of them as Samoan even though they've got Chinese-sounding last names. This is the kind of history that we need to also take into consideration when we think about the relationship between China and Samoa.
I come in Samoa already 24 years. This is my second home. My kids all born in Samoa. Essentially, yeah. We're making nice friends.
Yeah.
There are 4 waves of Chinese migration. The first wave was the free merchants. In the late 1800s, the Germans brought in indentured laborers. That was the beginning of the second wave. The descendants of the second wave and the first wave were able to bring their relatives over, and that's the third wave. And then the fourth wave of Chinese migration is the more recent Chinese that have come to Samoa.
I think the big difference between the old Chinese and the new Chinese is the old Chinese were very respectful. They were a key part of Samoa's development. Whereas the new Chinese, they've come in, it's money for them.
I heard before Chinese association, take care of this land.
Okay. You have lots of Samoan people coming to your Chinese restaurant?
I think 95% all Samoa.
I've tried many Samoan foods. I think I like every bit of it. Anything Samoa is something I like.
One of the main goals for this year is to try and set up an association that brings together the descendants of the first and the second and the third wave, as well as a new wave of Chinese migration. Bringing everyone together is the beginning of people having conversations about social issues, injustices, and also celebrating who we are. It's not just being part of the Samoan community, but also being Chinese.
All this geopolitical stuff. It's distracting us from what is our real problem, that is climate change. The fact that we are vulnerable to this. And whenever we have a disaster, cyclone, an earthquake, it is these countries who run to our aid. That makes us vulnerable. And is that weakening our position? Of course it is. Of course it is.
Small island developing states have to take on debt to recover from disasters. This Chinese debt and the hype around it has really soured the political appetite to do that. I think if you tie the hands behind the back of a government or a people, then you're really limited on how you can develop.
With the geopolitics, the influx of foreign aid that's coming through to the country is none like our people has experienced before. Aid dependency is growing at an alarming rate amongst our people.
Climate change is a massive issue. We contribute the least to the causes of climate change, and yet we are at the forefront. Climate change is the biggest existential threat to the Pacific region.
I think there's got to be a new breed of leaders that will take on these challenges and still remain true to themselves as Pacific Islanders and not be bullied.